The morning sun spilled across the quiet streets near Camp Pendleton, painting the diner windows gold. Inside, the aroma of frying bacon and coffee mingled with the hum of conversation. Marines on leave laughed over pancakes, their boots squeaking against the worn linoleum. Captain Ryan Cole, a confident young officer with the faintest trace of a smirk, stepped inside with his squad. It was a rare moment of reprieve from the rigorous training schedules and endless drills. Cole had grown accustomed to authority, to the admiration of younger soldiers, and to a reputation for his quick humor. The diner was a small, cozy place, the kind where veterans came to swap stories over coffee that had seen better days. Cole noticed the usual crowd of graying faces, their jackets adorned with patches from wars past: Vietnam, Desert Storm, the Gulf. They were the silent witnesses to history, quietly nursing their coffee and memories. His eyes fell on a particular man sitting alone in the corner, his back straight despite the years, his jacket tattered but carefully adorned with insignias that hinted at valor long forgotten. He seemed out of place, yet entirely at home among these relics of war. Cole, ever the curious officer, sauntered over with a grin, his swagger carrying the kind of confidence that only age, youth, and authority could grant. "Mind if I sit here?" he asked lightly, already knowing the answer. The man didn't respond immediately, only lifting his eyes with a steady, piercing gaze that seemed to measure Cole like a blade against his chest. There was no hostility, just an unspoken acknowledgement that this conversation would not be ordinary. Cole pulled up a chair, letting his joke-laden tone fill the space. "So, what was your call sign back in the day, old-timer? Something like Lucky Duck or Old-Timer?" He chuckled, expecting a laugh, a shrug, perhaps a little eye roll. The old man's expression didn't waver. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, met Cole's directly. "Iron Viper," he said, the words precise and calm, yet weighted with decades of history. Cole blinked. For a moment, he thought the man was joking, a relic of another time with a flair for theatrics. But the sudden hush in the diner made him pause. Forks hovered mid-air. Coffee cups were set down gently on stained tables. A few of the veterans glanced at each other with silent acknowledgement. The name wasn't just familiar. It carried a weight that Cole could feel pressing against his chest. "Iron Viper?" he repeated, trying to keep his tone light. "That's, a pretty intense name." His grin faltered. The room had gone quiet, but not politely. It was the kind of silence that spoke of reverence and caution, as though a ghost had walked among them. One man, sitting near the counter, muttered under his breath, "No, it can't be." His voice trembled slightly, a mixture of disbelief and awe. Another veteran simply stared at the floor, as if the mere mention of the call sign had opened a door to memories he had tried to forget. Cole's smile wavered. He had expected bemusement, perhaps a story of daring or mischief, but not this. Not the tense, almost sacred weight that seemed to hang in the air. The old man, still seated, simply took a slow sip of his black coffee, as if the name itself demanded patience and respect. Nice to meet you, Iron Viper," Cole said finally, unsure of whether he was speaking to a man or a legend. He extended his hand, but the veteran only nodded subtly, eyes still unflinching. Cole felt a chill creep along his spine, the kind of feeling that arises when one realizes they've stumbled into a story far larger than themselves. The young captain, who had faced combat exercises and battlefield simulations, suddenly felt like a novice in the presence of someone who had lived, survived, and carried the weight of history in silence. He glanced around the diner, noticing for the first time the subtle nods and quiet acknowledgments of the other veterans. They weren't mocking him. They weren't telling him to move along. They were warning him, silently, reverently, that this man was not an ordinary veteran. Cole's curiosity surged, a mix of awe and adrenaline. You? What did you do to get a name like that? He asked, keeping his tone casual, though his heart raced. The old man didn't answer immediately. He set his cup down slowly, the ceramic making a soft thud against the warm table. His eyes, clouded slightly with age, but still sharp and calculating, locked onto Cole's. I did what needed to be done, he said finally. His voice calm, but edged with something that hinted at storms long past. Sometimes the world forgets the price of certain choices. Sometimes we must carry them alone. Cole nodded slowly, unsure what to say next. He had asked a question in jest, expecting humor, stories, and perhaps a few embellishments. Instead, he had been confronted by a presence that commanded respect. A lifetime of unseen battles and unsung heroism, wrapped in a single call sign, Iron Viper. The young captain felt a strange mixture of emotions, fascination, fear, admiration, and a profound humility. He realized that this encounter, brief as it might seem, was a threshold into a world he had only glimpsed in history, books and whispered stories. A world of true courage and sacrifice, often unseen, often unrecorded. Cole's mind raced. Who was this man really? How many missions had he survived? How many lives had he saved? And how many horrors had he witnessed that never made it into any official report? Every instinct in him screamed to know more, yet a deeper instinct, one forged through respect, whispered caution. Some stories were not told lightly, and some names demanded silence. As Cole sat there, processing the weight of the moment, the old man took another sip of his coffee, unhurried, unafraid. Around them, the diner hummed back to life, but the spell lingered. Cole realized that his joke had stumbled upon something sacred, something beyond humor, beyond pride, beyond even the boundaries of ordinary life. For the first time in his young career, the captain felt small. He felt like a visitor in a cathedral of history, standing in the shadow of a man who had faced life and death in ways most could never imagine, and had carried the memory quietly, with the solemn dignity of a warrior who knew the true cost of courage. Cole left the diner that morning with a newfound reverence. The name Iron Viper had burned itself into his mind, a reminder that real valor often went uncelebrated, unrecorded, and yet remained eternally present in the lives it had touched. He didn't know it then, but that brief encounter would set him on a path that would challenge his understanding of heroism, loyalty, and sacrifice, a path that would eventually lead him face to face with the legend himself, and into the untold depths of a story decades in the making. After leaving the diner, Captain Ryan Cole could not shake the name that had chilled him to the bone, Iron Viper. On the drive back to base, the morning sun glaring off his windshield, he replayed the encounter over and over. The old man's calm gaze, the weight behind his words, and the sudden hush of the diner all lingered in his mind like a ghost. Cole had faced simulated combat scenarios and grueling field exercises, but nothing in his experience could have prepared him for this silent confrontation with history itself. At the base, he wandered through the corridors, his thoughts consumed by questions. Who was this man? What missions had earned him such a fearsome call sign? And why had the veterans reacted with a mixture of awe and fear when he had casually uttered the name? Cole knew his curiosity could be seen as impertinent. Veteran stories were often private, sacred in their own right, but he could not resist. He began by asking around discreetly. He approached a small group of retired Marines, men with stooped shoulders and worn hands who were sitting in the lounge sipping weak coffee. Their faces, lined with age and memory, betrayed the surprise at his question. Ever hear of a Marine called Iron Viper? Cole asked, careful to keep his tone casual. A long silence followed. Then one of the men, A grizzled Vietnam veteran with a scar slicing across his temple muttered, "You don't ask about Iron Viper. Not unless you're ready to hear things you don't understand." Cole's pulse quickened. He leaned in, sensing that the stories behind this man were more than mere legend. "I just want to know who he was," he said earnestly. "I met him today at the diner." The old man with the jacket. The veteran's eyes widened ever so slightly, as if confirming something only he knew. "If that's who you met, you've just brushed against the edge of history, son. That man, he saved lives in ways the world never learned about. Some call him a ghost. Some call him a hero. But nobody calls him by that name lightly." Cole absorbed the words, his curiosity now bordering on obsession. He began digging through archives at the base, poring over old files, mission logs, and declassified operation reports. Yet for every trace of Iron Viper, there were redacted sections, blacked out lines, and files marked as confidential. The name appeared only sparingly, often accompanied by a note. Operation Serpent's Fang, 1972, classified. Each reference that surfaced added another layer to the mystery. Reports suggested a Marine who had led reconnaissance missions deep behind enemy lines in Vietnam, missions so perilous that many soldiers never returned. Some reports hinted at lives saved at impossible odds, but all the details were deliberately vague. The lack of concrete information fascinated Cole more than it frustrated him. He reached out to a retired intelligence officer named Colonel James Harrington, who had once overseen special operations. Cole approached the call formally, not mentioning the diner encounter at first. When he asked about the elusive Iron Viper, Harrington's expression darkened. "You've stumbled onto something dangerous," Harrington warned quietly. That man was more than a soldier. He led missions that, if revealed, could have caused international incidents. The Pentagon erased most of the records for a reason. You don't ask about him unless you're prepared for the answers. Cole's respect grew. The thrill of discovery mingled with a humbling realization. The man he had joked with only hours ago was part of a legacy of sacrifice, bravery, and clandestine heroism that few could comprehend. Harrington leaned closer, lowering his voice. Iron Viper was known for one mission in particular, Serpent's Fang. It was off the books, off the maps, and off the radar of anyone who wasn't directly involved. Some of the people he saved owe their lives to him, but the world has never known his name. Cole's mind raced. How could one man disappear into obscurity after performing feats that would make legends out of most soldiers? Why had he chosen anonymity? And what had brought him to that diner today, decades later, still carrying the weight of his history in silence? For days, Cole became consumed with research. He read testimonies from other veterans, letters smuggled from the field, and fragmented reports that spoke of courage bordering on recklessness. Each story painted Iron Viper as a figure of near-mythical skill and unwavering moral compass. Yet none revealed his personal face, his voice, or his reasons. Cole realized that this man had lived among ordinary people without anyone truly knowing the hero in their midst. He also discovered fragments about the Serpent's Fang mission. It involved rescuing a platoon captured deep in enemy territory, a mission so dangerous that conventional strategy would have deemed it impossible. Iron Viper had volunteered, or perhaps been chosen, and led his men through jungles riddled with ambushes and booby traps. Every step had been calculated, every decision a gamble with life and death. The mission had succeeded, yet the records listed the participants as missing or deceased, erasing their achievements from history. Cole couldn't stop thinking about the old man's eyes. They had carried the calm certainty of someone who had walked through hell and returned, yet bore the memory like a silent burden. He began to understand the whispers at the diner, the quiet reverence, the subtle fear. Iron Viper wasn't just a man. He was a living testament to a kind of courage and sacrifice that the world was not ready to fully acknowledge. At night, Cole lay awake, replaying every detail he could remember. The old man's slow sip of coffee, the precise way he enunciated his call sign, and the unsettling quiet that followed. He realized that he had unintentionally trespassed into a sacred space, the private universe of a man who had faced death for others countless times and carried the weight silently. By the end of the week, Cole made a decision. He would find Iron Viper again, but not as a young officer looking for a story. He would approach him with humility, with the recognition that this was a man whose experiences deserved respect, not jokes. He would seek to understand, not to impress, and to witness the human side of a legend whose deeds had long been hidden in shadows. Cole knew deep down that meeting this man was no longer a matter of curiosity. It was a lesson in courage, humility, and the hidden costs of heroism. And in the quiet hours of the evening, as the base settled into its routine, he felt a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. The next encounter would not be casual. It would be transformative. The whispers of the past had begun to reach him, threading through every thought. Iron Viper was not a myth. He was real, tangible, and waiting to reveal the story that the world had forgotten. And Cole understood that once he stepped further into that story, his own life would be changed forever. The morning light filtered weakly through the thin curtains of Tom Vickers' modest home. The room smelled faintly of coffee and old paper, mingled with the faint tang of iron from the metals resting on a shelf. Each metal had its story, yet they told only fragments that Tom had long carried silently in his mind. Outside, the world moved on, unaware of the man who had once been at the heart of history's deadliest moments. Inside, the past was never far, never quiet. Tom sat in his favorite chair, warm leather, yielding comfortably to his frail frame. His eyes, still sharp despite the years, gazed at nothing, lost in the jungles of Vietnam. He could see them as clearly as if he had never left. Dense green foliage stretching endlessly, the humid air thick and suffocating, the constant, low hum of insects punctuated by distant echoes of gunfire. Every leaf seemed alive with danger, every shadow a potential threat. They had called him Iron Viper for a reason. In the field, his presence was unshakable, calm, deadly, methodical. Soldiers followed him not because they had to, but because they trusted him with their lives. Each decision he made was precise, calculated, and carried the weight of life and death. He remembered the first time he earned that call sign during a night ambush when his team had been surrounded. Without hesitation, he led a counterattack that saved the unit from annihilation, moving like a viper through the enemy's lines. By sunrise, the men were alive, the enemy scattered, and he had earned a reputation that would haunt him for decades. But today, he remembered the mission that defined him, Serpent's Fang. The operation was classified even within the highest ranks of the Marines. They were to infiltrate a heavily fortified enemy territory, rescuing a platoon of captured Marines whose lives were teetering on the edge of oblivion. Every route was mined, every movement monitored, and every second delayed increased the risk of discovery. Conventional military strategy would have labeled it impossible. Tom had volunteered, insisting that no man should be left to die. He could still hear the cries of his men, the frantic calls over radios, the anguished screams of those who fell. Each death etched itself into his memory like a scar, invisible but permanent. They were his responsibility, and he carried their absence every day. There had been moments when retreat was the only logical option, when the mission could have been aborted, and yet he pressed on. Leadership wasn't about orders. It was about morality, about doing the right thing when the cost could be your own life. The heat was relentless, pressing against him like a living thing. Mud sucked at boots, rain poured in sudden torrents, and the thick canopy overhead created a suffocating darkness even at noon. Each step forward required focus, precision, and unwavering resolve. Tom remembered moving silently, signaling with gestures learned in countless drills, eyes scanning every inch of terrain for the enemy. The whispers of his men, their trust and fear, echoed in his mind. He could not fail them. He would not fail them. He remembered the moment they found the captured platoon, chained, terrified, and hungry. The enemy had underestimated them, and in that brief window, Tom and his team acted. Explosions tore through the jungle, gunfire rattled like thunder, and in the chaos, lives were saved. But the cost was devastating. Nearly every member of his team fell, caught in crossfire or sacrificing themselves so others could survive. Tom carried the wounded, dragged the last of his men through mud and blood, and refused evacuation himself until every Marine under his protection was safe. The memory was both vivid and haunting. He had been declared dead after the mission, a casualty erased from reports to protect both the operation and the government's interests. The world believed Iron Viper had vanished, yet he had survived, choosing anonymity over recognition, silence over fame. He had returned home to a quiet life, unheralded and unseen, carrying the weight of decisions no one else could understand. Now, decades later, Tom's world was smaller. The jungles had been replaced by a modest living room, the cries of men by the quiet ticking of a clock. Yet the memories remained as sharp as the edge of a blade. He touched the metals lightly, each one a reminder of lives saved and lives lost, of impossible choices made under unbearable pressure. The irony of his life was not lost on him. He had once been a ghost in the eyes of the world, feared and respected by enemies and allies alike, and now he was invisible once more, not by necessity, but by choice. He had spent years avoiding recognition, believing that the past, no matter how heroic, could not coexist with the ordinary life he had tried to reclaim. And yet, in a diner not far from the base, he had been recognized in the smallest way, a name spoken casually, yet heavy with history. Iron Viper. The simple mention had stirred something long dormant. He had seen it in the young captain's eyes, curiosity, respect, and the faint tremor of awe. For a brief moment, he had considered speaking, revealing the story that had been buried for decades. But some truths were dangerous, some memories too sharp, and some wounds never fully healed. Still, he allowed himself a small acknowledgement. The recognition, fleeting though it was, reminded him that heroism, even when hidden, never truly vanished. It lingered, carried in the memory of those who survived, and in the respect of those willing to seek the truth. Tom rose from his chair, walking slowly to the window. Outside, the world moved on, unaware of the lives that had been shaped in the jungles of Vietnam, of the choices made in silence, of the sacrifices carried in the heart of a man who bore the name Iron Viper. He allowed himself a faint smile, a recognition that his story, though unspoken, had left its mark, and perhaps, just perhaps, it was time for that mark to be acknowledged once more. He returned to his chair and picked up his cup of coffee. The warmth was comforting, a small connection to the ordinary world he had chosen. Yet beneath the calm, the memories surged, the missions, the men, the fear, the courage, and the haunting knowledge of what had been done to protect others. He understood that some burdens never faded, some ghosts never left, and he was one of them, a ghost carrying the weight of his legend in silence, waiting for the moment the world might finally understand. As the afternoon sun shifted, Tom closed his eyes briefly, allowing himself to remember not just the pain, but also the small victories, the lives saved, the bonds forged in fire, and the unwavering resolve that had earned him a name now whispered with reverence. Iron Viper. The past had shaped him. The present held him. And somewhere in the distance, he sensed that the story he had carried alone for decades was about to be witnessed, perhaps for the first time, by someone who could understand its weight. Captain Ryan Cole could not escape the weight of the encounter. The name Iron Viper had burrowed into his thoughts, echoing in every quiet moment. Even during the rigorous drills at Camp Pendleton, his mind wandered back to the diner, the old man's steady gaze, the hush that fell over the room, the subtle nods and whispers of the other veterans. It was as if he had glimpsed a fragment of history, a hidden layer of heroism that existed beyond medals, citations, or public acclaim. Cole had always prided himself on being confident, capable, and quick-witted. He thrived in high-pressure situations, both on the training grounds and in leadership roles. Yet now, he felt a disquieting mixture of awe, humility, and curiosity, emotions he had rarely experienced simultaneously. The idea that he had met someone whose deeds were shrouded in secrecy, someone whose courage and sacrifice dwarfed the bravado of even seasoned officers, unsettled him. Determined to uncover the truth, Cole began a methodical investigation. At first, he relied on casual inquiries among his peers and local veterans. But he quickly realized that this would not suffice. Iron Viper was not a man whose story was shared lightly. Every casual conversation yielded fragments, half-truths, or hushed warnings. One retired sergeant had said, almost under his breath, "Son, don't go digging too deep. Some things aren't meant to be found." Iron Viper. He saved lives the world can't even know about. Cole's fascination grew. He began spending late nights combing through archives, old mission reports, and declassified documents. His office became a map of redactions, blacked-out lines, and cryptic notes. Operation Serpent's Fang appeared again and again, but details were scarce. Every page he turned deepened the mystery, hinting at acts of heroism that defied imagination, yet leaving him with frustratingly little concrete information. The young captain's obsession began affecting his routine. He would wake in the early hours, unable to sleep, poring over records and veteran testimonies. Each lead he found seemed to raise more questions than answers. Whispers of a man who moved like a shadow through the jungles of Vietnam, saving lives at impossible odds, appeared repeatedly in reports from other soldiers. One letter described a daring rescue of a captured platoon deep in enemy territory, a feat that had never been officially recorded. Cole reached out to retired intelligence officers, cautiously at first, withholding the diner encounter. He needed someone who could navigate the classified files without drawing unwanted attention. Finally, he contacted Colonel James Harrington, who had overseen Black Ops units during Vietnam. The retired officer answered on a secure line, his voice low and tinged with caution. "You're treading dangerous ground, Cole," Harrington said. Iron Viper wasn't just a soldier. He led a team that carried out missions no one else could handle. If the truth about Serpent's Fang ever surfaced, it could have sparked international incidents. "You understand that, right?" "I understand," Cole replied, his voice steady despite the rush of adrenaline in his veins. "But I need to know. I need to understand who he was." Harrington sighed. "Very few people do. Iron Viper. He was a man who made impossible choices, carried impossible burdens. He saved lives that no one else could reach. And he disappeared. Officially, he died. Unofficially, he walked away. He has been a ghost ever since." Cole felt a chill run down his spine. The realization settled in that the man he had met at the diner was not merely an ordinary veteran, but a living legend whose deeds had been hidden to protect both him and countless others. He also realized that he had been foolish to approach the encounter lightly, with a joke. Respect was owed, not levity. Despite the warnings, Cole's determination intensified. He began compiling everything he could find: names, dates, locations, reports, and testimonies. He cross-referenced every account, searching for consistency and truth. Each clue painted Iron Viper as a man of extraordinary skill, relentless courage, and unwavering moral integrity. Yet the most important details remained elusive: his personal experiences, his thoughts, his reasons for disappearing. The obsession became all-consuming. Cole's team noticed the change in him, the distracted glances, the long hours, the quiet mutterings about research that never fully explained what he was looking for. He was no longer simply a captain leading exercises. He was a detective, an investigator of history, piecing together the life of a man whose legend had been erased from official records. At night, Cole would stare at photographs of the era, maps of Vietnam, snapshots of Marines in the field, and declassified images of jungle operations. He imagined Iron Viper moving through the dense foliage, his movements precise and lethal, leading men to safety while the world slept. He imagined the fear and determination in those young faces, the bond forged through shared peril, and the weight of responsibility carried alone by one man. The obsession was personal as well. Cole found himself reflecting on his own leadership and decisions. Could he have made the choices Iron Viper had made? Could he have prioritized others over self-preservation, carried the burden of loss without recognition, and remained steadfast in silence for decades? The comparison humbled him, forcing him to confront the limits of his own courage and integrity. Finally, after weeks of tireless research and persistent questioning, Cole found a thread that seemed credible. A retired Marine, cautious and wary, revealed a small piece of classified information. Iron Viper had indeed survived Serpent's Fang and had returned to the United States under a veil of secrecy. Officially, he was dead. Unofficially, he was living quietly, blending into civilian life, carrying the scars of war that were both visible and invisible. Cole's pulse quickened. He now had a name, a place, and the faintest hint of timing. He realized that the man he had met at the diner, the frail, quiet veteran with the piercing eyes, was truly the same Iron Viper whose legend had haunted his research. The realization brought both awe and apprehension. He had not only brushed against history, but had found it living, breathing, and waiting to be understood. The obsession became a mission of respect, not curiosity. Cole knew he needed to approach Iron Viper again, but differently this time, with humility, patience, and reverence. He would not ask for stories lightly, or seek heroics for personal glory. He would listen, witness, and honor the man whose life had defined courage, sacrifice, and moral clarity in ways the world could not yet comprehend. As the days passed, Cole's determination hardened. He began mapping the diner's schedule, predicting when Iron Viper might appear, and preparing himself to meet the man not as a young captain seeking anecdotes, but as a witness to a life that demanded recognition. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing upon him. If Iron Viper chose to speak, it would not merely be a story of heroism. It would be a lesson in integrity, courage, and the human cost of unseen battles. Late one night, Cole sat in his office, surrounded by piles of reports, maps, and redacted files. He stared at a photograph of Vietnam. Jungle paths stretching endlessly, soldiers moving cautiously, unseen dangers lurking. He imagined Iron Viper there, moving like a shadow, carrying the lives of men in his hands, and wondered if he himself would have acted with the same unwavering resolve. He knew then that his obsession was not mere fascination. It was a quest for understanding, a journey into the essence of heroism, and an attempt to bridge the gap between the past and the present. And deep inside, he felt a quiet certainty. The next encounter with Iron Viper would not be casual. It would be transformative, both for him and for the story that had waited decades to be heard. Cole leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. The room was dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of a desk lamp. In the silence, he whispered the name once more. Iron Viper. It was no longer a joke. It was a promise to uncover the truth, honor the sacrifice, and witness the life of a man whose courage had shaped history in ways few could ever imagine. The morning air outside the diner was crisp, carrying the faint scent of salt from the nearby ocean. Captain Ryan Cole parked his jeep a few blocks away, unwilling to appear conspicuous. He had returned to the diner after weeks of research, careful not to alarm anyone. Today, he wasn't approaching the frail veteran with a joke or casual curiosity. Today, he approached with respect and a quiet determination to learn, to witness, and to honor. The diner's door jingled as he entered, the familiar hum of conversation and clatter of dishes greeting him. The veterans inside glanced up briefly, some nodding subtly in acknowledgement of his presence. Cole scanned the room until he saw him, Thomas Mickers. The old man was seated in the same corner booth, cup of black coffee in hand, staring out the window as though seeing something invisible to everyone else. His jacket was worn, but carefully maintained, the patches from decades of service catching the morning light. Cole approached cautiously, feeling a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. "Sir," he said softly, pulling out the chair across from him. "May I sit with you?" For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, slowly, Tom nodded. "Sit," he said, his voice low but steady. There was no warmth in his tone, no invitation. Yet there was also no resistance. Cole understood instantly. This was a man accustomed to control, to command, and to being approached on his own terms. The captain settled into the chair, careful not to break the quiet. For several moments, neither spoke. Cole observed him, the weathered hands, the alert eyes, the calm demeanor that belied decades of warfare and impossible choices. Finally, Cole began. I wanted to apologize," he said, hesitating. "The last time we met, I joked about your call sign. I didn't realize." His words trailed off. Tom's gaze held him, unwavering. "You didn't realize what?" he asked evenly. "That I was sitting across from someone extraordinary," Cole admitted. "Someone whose life and courage, well, I can't even begin to comprehend it." For the first time, a faint smile touched Tom's lips, not of amusement, but of acknowledgement. It is rare for someone your age to understand that heroism is often silent. Most people see medals and medals only. They do not see the lives saved, the choices made in the dark, the costs carried alone. Cole nodded, leaning forward slightly. "I've been reading, researching, talking to veterans, retired officers. I wanted to know more. About you. About Iron Viper. About Serpent's Fang." Tom's eyes flickered with a mixture of surprise and wariness. "And what did you hope to find?" "Truth," Cole replied simply. "And understanding. I needed to know what it meant to lead, to protect, to sacrifice. As you did." For a long moment, Tom studied the young captain. Finally, he spoke, voice quieter, almost a whisper. Few people ask those questions sincerely. Most ask for stories or glory or medals. Few ask for understanding. You seem to understand. Cole felt the weight of the words pressing against him. He realized that he had not merely come to satisfy curiosity. He had come seeking a lesson in courage, morality, and sacrifice, lessons that could not be learned in training exercises or tactical simulations. Tom leaned back in his chair, eyes drifting to the window, as if seeing the past overlaying the present. Serpent's Fang, he began slowly, was a mission that tested every fiber of my being. We were tasked with rescuing a platoon deep in enemy territory. The kind of mission the book said was impossible. Every path was mined, every approach covered. Every decision could mean death, ours or theirs. Cole listened intently, his own heartbeat matching the tension in the old man's recounting. "What made you volunteer?" he asked softly. Tom's jaw tightened. "Because someone had to. Someone had to go where logic said it was too dangerous. Someone had to carry the weight of lives, not their own. We were Marines. That is what we do." The captain imagined the jungle, the humidity, the gunfire, the screams, and realized that he could barely fathom it. He could understand strategy, tactics, even courage in theory. But to live it, day after day, knowing that one wrong step could cost lives, that was beyond him. Tom continued. "We moved like shadows. Silence was our ally. Every step, every breath, every decision was calculated. The platoon was captured, terrified, exhausted. The enemy had underestimated them. And in that moment, in that single moment, the lives of dozens of men rested entirely on our choices." Cole felt his throat tighten. "And you saved them." Tom shook his head slightly. "We saved some. Others did not make it. My team, my men. They sacrificed everything to protect those we were tasked with saving. I survived because I carried them, because I refused evacuation until everyone else was safe. That is why they call me Iron Viper." Silence fell over the table, punctuated only by the soft hum of the diner and the occasional clatter of dishes. Cole's mind reeled. He had read fragments, whispers of the mission, scattered reports. But hearing it, the human truth, the weight of sacrifice, the moral complexity was something entirely different. "You disappeared," Cole said finally, careful with his words. "After the mission." Tom's gaze met his, unflinching. "I had no choice. Officially, I was dead. My survival had to remain secret. The world could not know what we did, nor the cost of it. Recognition would have endangered lives, drawn attention to missions that were better left forgotten. I chose anonymity, silence, and decades of solitude." Cole swallowed hard. "And yet, here you are." Tom gave a faint, almost wistful smile. "Yes, here I am. But I remain a ghost in the eyes of most. Only a few, like you. Notice the weight behind the name." Cole felt a mixture of awe and humility. "I don't want to exploit your story. I want to understand it, to honor it." Tom nodded slowly. "Then listen carefully. Understand this. Heroism is not in medals. It is in choices, in sacrifice, in the moments when no one is watching. It is quiet. It is heavy. And it is often lonely." Cole leaned back, absorbing every word. The weight of history, the gravity of Iron Viper's life, pressed upon him. He understood that he had glimpsed something rare, a man whose courage had shaped lives and history, yet whose humanity remained untouched by fame or accolades. For the first time, Cole saw the old man not as a veteran, not as a legend, but as a human being who had carried unimaginable burdens for decades. The conversation shifted the young captain's perspective on leadership, courage, and the true meaning of sacrifice. As the morning light strengthened outside the diner, Cole realized he had found more than a story. He had found a lesson. And in that quiet corner, over black coffee and whispered confessions, a bond was forming between the young officer and the man who had become a living legend, whose story demanded to be heard, respected, and remembered. The encounter ended with no fanfare, no ceremony, no applause, only the quiet acknowledgement of understanding between two Marines, separated by generations, but united by the weight of duty, courage, and moral integrity. Cole left the diner that day transformed. He carried not only the fragments of Iron Viper's story, but also a profound understanding of what it meant to lead, to sacrifice, and to live with choices that no one else could comprehend. And somewhere in the quiet of the city, Tom Vickers, Iron Viper, returned to his solitude, lighter perhaps, for the first time in decades, knowing that his story had found someone who would bear its truth with respect. The late afternoon sun streamed through the diner's windows, casting long shadows across the warm wooden floor. Outside, traffic moved in steady rhythm, oblivious to the stories unfolding within. Captain Ryan Cole and Thomas Iron Viper Vickers sat quietly across from one another, the air thick with the weight of history. Cole had listened to fragments of the old man's past, but now he sought the truth in its entirety, his story buried beneath decades of silence, redacted reports, and whispered legends. Tom's fingers traced the rim of his coffee cup, the motions deliberate, almost meditative. "You want the truth," he said softly, eyes meeting Cole's. "About Serpent's Fang. Very few have asked, and fewer still are ready to hear it." "I'm ready," Cole said, though a knot of apprehension twisted in his stomach. He had read reports, heard rumors, and chased whispers, but nothing had prepared him for the weight of the reality he was about to confront. Tom inhaled slowly, letting the words gather before they emerged. "We were assigned to a platoon that had been captured behind enemy lines, in a region the maps didn't officially acknowledge. The intelligence was fragmented, incomplete, but one thing was clear. If we didn't act, those men would die." Cole leaned forward, his pulse quickening. "How did you approach it?" "The first rule," Tom began, voice steady, "was to move like a shadow. Every step, every movement had to be calculated. The enemy was expecting conventional tactics, but we were unconventional. I led a small reconnaissance team, the best men I had, into dense jungle terrain where every sound, every scent, every movement could be fatal. We crawled through mud, waded through rivers, avoided patrols, and used the cover of night to our advantage. Timing was everything." Cole pictured the scene, the suffocating heat, the incessant buzz of insects, the oppressive canopy above that turned midday into twilight. "And the platoon?" he asked quietly. "They were terrified," Tom said, a shadow crossing his face. They had been stripped of hope. Hunger, fear, and the constant threat of death had worn them down. And yet, they still clung to life, and I had to ensure they had a chance to return to it. Tom paused, sipping his coffee before continuing. "The enemy was ruthless. We lost some of our men early on. The first wave of fire was devastating. I had to make a choice. Abandon the mission and save the few left on my team, or press on and risk everything to save those in captivity." Cole swallowed hard, feeling the tension in the old man's words. "You pressed on," he said softly. "Yes," Tom replied. "Because leadership isn't about logic alone. It's about responsibility. It's about morality. I could not, in good conscience, leave those men behind." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the soft murmur of the diner around them. Cole struggled to imagine the courage required to make such a decision, the moral clarity to risk lives, including one's own, for the sake of others. Tom's voice grew quieter, more intimate. "We reached the prisoners under cover of darkness. The rescue was brutal. The enemy had expected us to fail, but our timing and tactics allowed us to strike with precision. My team fought with everything they had. Every man who fell did so to ensure others could live. I carried the wounded, pulled the trapped from fire and rubble, and refused evacuation until everyone else was safe." Cole's hands gripped the edge of the table. "And your men?" he asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Tom's eyes darkened. "Many didn't make it. My team, my brothers, they sacrificed everything. Their names are not in reports. Their deeds are not in history books. but their courage saved lives, and their sacrifice has been my burden to bear. The weight of the confession pressed down on Cole. He had known war in theory, leadership in practice, but nothing could prepare him for the gravity of real, unrecorded heroism. The silence in the diner seemed to thicken, as though the ghosts of the fallen were sitting with them, listening to the words of the man who had carried their legacy in solitude. "Why disappear afterward?" Cole asked, his voice barely audible. Tom's gaze fell to his hands, wrinkled and scarred from years of both battle and life. Recognition would have endangered everyone. My survival was classified. The government erased my story to prevent political fallout. To the world, I was dead. And so I chose to live as a ghost, carrying the memory of my team, my choices, and their sacrifice alone. Cole's throat tightened. That's unimaginable. To live with all of that, alone. Yes, Tom said quietly. And yet, it was necessary. The world cannot always bear the truth of sacrifice. Sometimes, silence is the only shield. Cole's mind raced. He had been obsessed with uncovering a legend, yet now he understood that the story was not about glory or fame. It was about responsibility, integrity, and the unbearable cost of heroism. He felt the weight of his own insignificance compared to the life Tom had led, decades of carrying the unacknowledged weight of others' lives. You've borne this all these years," Cole whispered. Tom nodded, a faint tremor in his hand betraying the weight of years of solitude. "Every day, every hour. I have lived with memories of men who trusted me with their lives and perished in my stead. The mission succeeded, yes. We saved lives, but the cost. It is a cost that never truly leaves you." Cole felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. He had come seeking a story of heroism. Instead, he had found the raw, unvarnished truth of what it meant to lead, to sacrifice, and to carry the burden of lives that no one else could know. Tom leaned back, exhaling slowly. "This is why I remain hidden. Recognition, fame, applause, they mean nothing compared to the weight of the choices made. My team, the men who fell, the lives we saved, they are the story. The rest is irrelevant." Cole nodded, understanding for the first time that heroism was not about medals or ceremonies. It was about conscience, courage, and the relentless moral compass that guided those who were willing to risk everything for others. For a long moment, they sat in silence, two generations of Marines connected by unspoken respect. The young captain, once eager for stories and details, now realized that listening, witnessing, and honoring were the greatest forms of recognition. Finally, Cole spoke, voice steady but filled with emotion. "Sir, I don't want to exploit your story. I want to honor it. The world should know, or at least remember, what you and your men did." Tom's eyes softened. "Perhaps. But the world is not ready for the full truth. They may never be. But you understand why it mattered. That is enough." Cole nodded, silently vowing that he would carry Iron Viper's story, not for glory, not for fame, but as a testament to the sacrifices, choices, and courage of a man who had lived in the shadow of history, unseen yet eternally significant. The diner continued its gentle rhythm around them, oblivious to the weight of the conversation. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting golden hues across the streets. Inside, two Marines sat together, bound by history, respect, and the unspoken, understanding that some stories are heavier than words can capture, and yet must be remembered, in some form, if only by those willing to listen. After that morning in the diner, Captain Ryan Cole left with a renewed sense of purpose. He had listened to Thomas Vicker's story, witnessed the heavy burden he carried, and felt the weight of decades of unacknowledged heroism pressing against him. The story of Iron Viper was not just history, it was a moral responsibility. Cole knew he could not let it fade back into silence. But he also understood the danger, the complexity, and the delicate line between recognition and exposure. Back at the base, Cole began gathering evidence. He revisited declassified documents, cross-referenced reports, and compiled testimonies from retired Marines who had been part of or adjacent to Serpent's Fang. Some records were incomplete, others redacted or deliberately altered to obscure the truth. Each fragment he found felt like a piece of a larger mosaic. The full picture remained elusive, but the outlines were becoming clearer. Cole approached the mission with meticulous care. He needed to respect Tom's anonymity while verifying the story. Letters from survivors, testimonies from colleagues, and archived photographs all became part of his dossier. He created a timeline of the operation, the capture of the platoon, the infiltration, the rescue, and the losses endured. Every detail added weight, humanity, and urgency to the narrative. But bureaucracy was an obstacle. Cole submitted formal requests to the Pentagon to unseal relevant files. Predictably, the response was a mixture of delays, procedural roadblocks, and classified denials. Officials emphasized the sensitive nature of the mission, the potential fallout if full details were released, and the precedent it might set. Cole encountered resistance at every turn, yet he persisted. He knew that recognition for Tom and his team was overdue, not for fame, but for justice, for the historical record, and for the moral acknowledgement that their sacrifices demanded. Outside the official channels, Cole turned to the retired veterans who had spoken in whispers at the diner. Some were hesitant to participate. Old wounds, guilt, and memories of the war kept them silent. Others, however, saw in Cole a younger generation ready to honor the unspoken truth. Slowly, he gathered corroborating accounts, piecing together not only the facts, but also the human dimension of the mission. The fear, courage, desperation, and unyielding determination of men who had risked everything for others. Cole realized the challenge was not merely uncovering facts, but telling a story in a way that preserved dignity, honored the fallen, and respected Tom's wishes. He reached out to journalists he trusted, not sensationalists, but those committed to responsible, ethical storytelling. They reviewed the materials, vetted the testimonies, and advised on the safest and most respectful way to bring Iron Viper's story to light without compromising the lives of any survivors or the integrity of the narrative. Meanwhile, Tom remained cautious. The old man continued to visit the diner, aware that Cole was working behind the scenes. He watched from a distance, evaluating the young captain's commitment, the care with which he handled sensitive details, and the respect he showed not only for Tom, but for every man whose life had been touched by Serpent's Fang. It was not recognition for its own sake that mattered. It was acknowledgement that was truthful, measured, and moral. One afternoon, as Cole and Tom sat together over coffee, Cole shared his progress. "We've gathered enough verified accounts to construct a comprehensive record," he said. "I'm confident that we can honor your story without compromising anyone." Tom nodded slowly, weighing the consequences. "It is dangerous," he said. "The world is not always ready for the truth. There are people who would politicize it, distort it, or exploit it for their own purposes. Are you sure this is what you want?" Cole met his gaze with quiet determination. "Yes, but only if you approve. This is your story, Tom, not mine. It's about you, your team, and the men who didn't make it. The world should remember them. And I want to make sure it's done right." The old man's eyes softened. "Then we do it together, carefully, truthfully, and with respect for those who can no longer speak." Over the following weeks, Cole coordinated a careful release. Declassified documents, survivor testimonies, and verified accounts were assembled into a narrative that captured both the heroism and the cost of Serpent's Fang. He worked with military historians to ensure accuracy, contextualizing the operation within the broader history of the Vietnam War, while highlighting the extraordinary acts of courage that had gone unrecognized for decades. The day of recognition was modest but meaningful. A ceremony was held at the base, attended by surviving members of Tom's team, descendants of those who had perished, and a few trusted journalists. Tom Vickers, once invisible, was finally honored, not as a celebrity, but as a living testament to courage, sacrifice, and moral integrity. Captain Cole stood beside him, witnessing the culmination of their months of work, feeling a sense of solemn pride. Medals were presented, stories were recounted, and for the first time in decades, the world acknowledged Iron Viper. The ceremony was quiet, free of fanfare, yet its impact was profound. Survivors embraced, tears were shed, and memories long buried were finally honored. Cole felt a deep satisfaction, not from the spectacle, but for knowing that truth, courage, and sacrifice had been recognized carefully and ethically. After the ceremony, Tom sat in his favorite corner booth at the diner, a cup of coffee in hand. He allowed himself a small, contented smile. For decades, he had carried the weight of Serpent's Fang alone, a ghost in the shadows. Now at last, the story was told, the sacrifices acknowledged, and the lives remembered. Cole joined him, sitting quietly. "You deserve this," he said simply. Tom nodded. "It was never about recognition," he said. "It was about doing the right thing, about the men who trusted me with their lives. But it is a comfort to know that they are remembered, and that their sacrifices are honored." Cole glanced at the old man, seeing in him not only the legend of Iron Viper, but also the humanity, vulnerability, and enduring strength that had guided him through impossible choices. "Their legacy will live on," Cole said. "And yours, too. You've taught me more than I can ever say." For the first time in decades, Tom allowed himself to relax fully. The burden of unacknowledged heroism had been shared. The story had been told, and the lives saved and lost had been honored. The quiet weight that had defined his life was lifted, if only slightly, by the careful, respectful recognition of those who understood the depth of his courage. Outside, the world moved on. But inside the diner, two Marines sat together, separated by generations, yet bound by duty, courage, and respect, sharing a quiet moment that reflected the enduring power of truth, sacrifice, and moral integrity. Captain Cole had completed his mission as a witness, advocate, and guardian of history. Iron Viper had reclaimed a piece of peace, knowing that the story he had carried alone for decades would finally endure. And in that quiet, unassuming corner of the world, the legacy of Serpent's Fang, the courage of its participants, and the moral clarity of one extraordinary man had been honored at last. The first light of dawn spilled over the small town where Thomas Vickers now lived, illuminating streets he had walked for decades without recognition, without expectation of notice. The town itself was quiet, a slow rhythm of ordinary lives unfolding, untroubled by the extraordinary story hidden in their midst. Yet within the walls of the modest diner and the rooms of his simple home, history had finally caught up with him. The legend of Iron Viper, once a whispered secret, a shadow in classified reports, had become something real, tangible, and acknowledged. Tom sat by the window, his hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee. He looked out over the streets, observing the familiar routine of the world, children heading to school, neighbors exchanging greetings, the hum of distant traffic. To any passerby, he was simply an elderly man, a veteran among many. But today, his mind was elsewhere, wandering across decades of memory, the jungles of Vietnam, the nights spent crawling through mud, the gunfire, the chaos, the weight of impossible choices. He allowed himself a rare moment of reflection, unhurried, unguarded. Captain Ryan Cole had been there during the recognition ceremony, standing respectfully beside him, witnessing the acknowledgement that had long been overdue. For Tom, it was more than a ceremony. It was validation of a life defined by duty, courage, and moral clarity. Yet even as the accolades faded, the medals polished, and the stories circulated in subdued reports, Tom understood the true measure of his life could never be reduced to applause. It existed in the lives saved, in the men who had followed him into darkness, and in the quiet decisions made when no one was watching. Cole had grown too, profoundly affected by the experience. He had arrived seeking a story, an anecdote, or perhaps a fragment of inspiration. What he received was a lesson in responsibility, humility, and leadership at the highest moral level. He had witnessed the burden of choices, the weight of sacrifice, and the true definition of heroism. For a young officer, this encounter would shape every decision he made in the future, guiding him through the fog of war, uncertainty, and moral ambiguity. In the weeks following the ceremony, Tom began receiving letters, phone calls, and emails from veterans, historians, and even strangers who had read carefully vetted articles about the mission. They did not reach out to praise him personally or to elevate his status. They reached out to honor the truth he had embodied, to acknowledge the courage of those who had stood beside him, and to express gratitude for sacrifices long hidden. Each message was a reminder that heroism, though silent for decades, could still resonate, still inspire, still touch lives. Tom reflected on the irony of it all. For years, he had carried the weight of Serpent's Fang alone, invisible and unacknowledged. He had walked through life as a ghost, bearing the memory of fallen comrades and the trauma of impossible decisions. Recognition had never been the goal. Duty and integrity had always been sufficient. Yet now, decades later, the world had finally glimpsed the truth, not the glorified myth, but the raw human reality of courage and sacrifice. Cole visited frequently, not just as a witness or advocate, but as a companion, a confidant, and a student of the life Tom had led. They would sit together in the diner, quietly sipping coffee, sometimes speaking, often just sharing the silence. For Cole, it was a living lesson in humility and moral fortitude. For Tom, it was a rare opportunity to share memories safely, with someone who understood without needing embellishment, someone who respected the weight of unspoken sacrifice. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Tom spoke with a quiet solemnity. "You see, Ryan, what we did, what we endured. It was never for recognition. That is why I disappeared. Recognition is fleeting. The burden of choice is not. What matters is how you act when no one is watching. That is where true courage lives." Cole nodded, absorbing every word. "I understand, sir, and I will carry that lesson, not just in my career, but in life. You've taught me that heroism isn't just about courage in battle. It's about moral clarity, responsibility, and integrity in every decision." Tom allowed himself a faint smile. For decades, he had measured his life by the lives he protected, by the moral weight of his decisions, and by the quiet victories unseen by the world. Now, he felt the faintest sense of peace, knowing that his story, and the stories of those who had fallen, would endure, remembered by someone who truly understood. The next morning, Tom took a long walk through the town. The streets were empty, except for a few early risers. He passed the park where children played, the small grocery store where neighbors exchanged greetings, and the post office where letters of acknowledgement still arrived. The world felt ordinary, mundane, and yet profoundly alive. It struck him that life continued around heroism without pause, that history and ordinary life existed side by side, often without ever colliding. He paused at a small memorial plaque for local veterans, running his fingers over the engraved names. He thought of the men who had fallen during Serpent's Fang, those who had never returned home, and those whose lives had been forever altered by the mission. For the first time in decades, he allowed himself to imagine that their sacrifices were not forgotten. That acknowledgement, though delayed, had finally reached them through him, through Cole, through the careful recounting of truth. Tom returned home, settling into his chair by the window. He poured himself a cup of coffee, savoring the warmth and quiet. Across town, Cole was reviewing some of the records, ensuring that the integrity of their shared work remained intact. In that moment, the weight of unspoken heroism felt lighter. Not absent, but tempered by understanding, respect, and moral clarity. The legacy of Iron Viper would endure, not as a story of legend or myth, but as a testament to courage, sacrifice, and moral responsibility. It would teach future generations that heroism is often unseen, that leadership carries a heavy moral weight, and that integrity is measured not by applause, but by the quiet decisions made when lives hang in the balance. As the day gave way to evening, Tom reflected on the arc of his life. He had survived impossible missions, carried the weight of fallen comrades, and lived for decades in relative obscurity. Yet, through careful acknowledgement, advocacy, and moral reckoning, the truth had emerged. The story would be remembered, studied, and honored, not for fame, not for glory, but for the enduring lesson of courage and integrity that transcended time, war, and generations. Cole entered the room quietly, placing a hand gently on Tom's shoulder. "Sir," he said softly, "thank you for everything, for the sacrifices, the courage, and the lessons. The world may never fully understand, but I do, and I will carry that with me always." Tom nodded, eyes reflecting both the weight of the past and the faint relief of acknowledgement. "Then the mission continues, in a sense," he said quietly. "Through you, Ryan, through those willing to understand the cost of courage and act with integrity. That is how the legacy of Iron Viper survives." Outside, the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, leaving the town bathed in a gentle twilight. Inside, two Marines, separated by decades yet united by duty, respect, and moral understanding, sat together. Their shared silence spoke volumes of battles fought, lives saved, sacrifices endured, and lessons learned. In that quiet, ordinary moment, the extraordinary story of Iron Viper endured, etched forever into history, hearts, and conscience. And so, the legacy remained, not as a tale of fame, but as a living testament to courage, sacrifice, and moral integrity. The man who had once been a ghost in the world's eyes now carried his story with quiet dignity, ensuring that the lessons of Serpent's Fang, the sacrifices of his team, and the essence of true heroism would endure beyond time, beyond war, and beyond memory.